I have noticed that many of the students in my class are struggling with various concepts and skills. Do you notice that your students also need help on various topics?
Yes, I have seen this too.
How do you address this problem?
What I have noticed this year is that students are struggling with math word problems and fraction concepts, so that has been my focus lately. Even though our whole school doesn't implement RTI, we have been implementing the basic principles of the RTI process in our classrooms this year to provide interventions for these skills. Are you familiar with what RTI is?
I have heard the term and I know that RTI stands for Response to Intervention and that it involves a three-step tiered process, but I'm not sure what that means exactly.
Yes, RTI is designed to be an early intervention process to prevent students from failing or falling behind. Each of the three tiers builds on one another. The ultimate goal is that students get the interventions they need to move out of a tier. To begin the RTI process, I first administer a universal screening assessment. In our school, we use the STAR math test to get a baseline for our students. I use this data along with my observations, formal and informal assessments to find areas of individual weakness and group them accordingly. Clearly, you already know the students that need additional support, and I'm sure you're already implementing Tier 1 strategies in your classroom without even knowing it. These strategies that you are providing during your whole class instruction, like scaffolding, pre teaching, using manipulatives, and providing leveled books for reading.
Oh, I didn't realize that I was actually providing some Tier 1 interventions in my classroom. So, how do you know when students need to move to Tier 2?
The students that need more targeted instruction because they aren't successful with Tier 1 interventions will need to move to Tier 2. I provide Tier 2 interventions during our flex block because that's the time in our daily schedule that is set aside for providing interventions. Tier 2 interventions are more intensive and targeted to meet the needs of individual students. These interventions can include extended time or small group instruction.
I feel like I've tried to implement interventions during Flex, but they don't always pan out like I intended them to. I don't really know what to do.
It sounds like you need to shift your thinking from blaming yourself and clearing out the shoulds from your vocabulary. The principle from Xander and Xander teaches us to direct our attention away from pointing out the problems because it causes us to act ineffectively. Instead, try changing the shoulds into questions that push you to think about alternative intervention strategies. Try to change your mindset away from what should I be doing to something like, what is a more effective way to provide interventions? These questions should lead you to the answers to help you enact change instead of just feeling helpless. Xander and Xander also discuss how we have to allow ourselves to make mistakes. When we recognize that we will inevitably make mistakes along the way, we are more likely to be successful because it will leave us better prepared to deal with the mistakes effectively.
Okay, that's a good point. I have to start recognizing that not everything will be perfect and that I will learn as the process goes on. So, one question I want to ask you: could you share with me how you are providing multiple interventions to students at once?
Well, first, I place our students in groups based on areas of needs or strengths because not all students need or will participate in the RTI process. Students that are advanced can be working on enrichment activities at this time or work with a peer buddy for a struggling student. You don't provide interventions to students who don't need them. I have those students work on project based learning activities, or sometimes I have them complete a study island assignment on the computers at the next grade level to challenge them.
How do you know if your students are responding positively to the Tier 2 interventions?
Part of the process of the RTI is progress monitoring. In order to know if the interventions are effective, students need to be closely monitored. If an intervention is working, you will see the progress in the student. With that being said, remember, not all interventions work the same for each student. Progress monitoring happens frequently and throughout all the three tiers. It's important that the instrument used for universal screenings match the instrument used for progress monitoring. Since we use STAR for our universal screening,
We can also use STAR to monitor students. Depending on the tier the student is, dictates how often you progress monitor. Okay, so what are Tier 3 interventions then? Tier 3 interventions are more intensive and usually implemented individually to students. If your students aren't making progress with Tier 1 or Tier 2 interventions, then you might need to seek the help from professionals outside your classroom. These students may need to see our reading interventionist or be referred to the INRS committee, what we have here, the Intervention and Referral Services, or they might need an evaluation from special education services. You look a bit overwhelmed. How are you feeling right now? I just feel like there's so many steps and extra work that I have to fit into my already hectic teaching schedule. How am I going to make the time to do all of this? I'm only one teacher in the room, and I feel like this is impossible to do all on your own. I totally get it, but don't feel overwhelmed. This is a process and it takes some time. The best advice is to start small, but start somewhere. Just focus on one step at a time, and you will see how beneficial the process is to both your instruction and to student growth. I would hate to see you get trapped in this downward spiral talk. When you get stuck in this sort of mindset, coined by the Xander brothers, you remove the idea of possibility from your thought process. Try thinking about what amazing possibilities could result from these interventions instead of the lengthy process of each step. Okay, well, what about the parents? Could you explain how parents are notified and what their involvement level is in the intervention process? Sure. First, you should send a general letter home to parents explaining what RTI is. Keep in mind to include each step of the process and how students move from tier to tier. Parents need to understand that your ultimate goal is to help their child succeed academically in school. Then you could follow up with the parents of the students that have been identified. This letter can explain to the families that you will use research based strategies within the general classroom setting to help their child succeed. Use this letter as a way for you to explain the process of Tier 1 to the families. If the student doesn't make sufficient growth, then you would send home a letter for the Tier 2. In this letter, be sure to explain the more targeted interventions you will be using with their child. Repeat the step with a Tier 3 letter if the student still needs to receive intensive interventions with special education teachers, a reading specialist, or is being referred to special services. Even though that sounds like a lot of work, it's definitely necessary to inform parents about student progress along the way. It also sounds like there's a lot of people involved in this RTI process. I've heard you mention general education teachers, reading specialists, interventionists, and special education teachers. What's exactly the role of these specialists and teachers in the RTI process? All of these teachers can make up an RTI team. This team is a group of educational professionals that work together to develop and implement an intervention plan. They meet with a general education teacher and other specialists to discuss possible intervention and ways to progress monitor student growth. Based on the interventions implemented, they will meet multiple times throughout the school year to discuss the data and how we should move forward. Oh, okay. Now I understand. Thank you so much for sharing all of that information with me. I feel like I have a better understanding and really haven't realized that I have been doing a lot of interventions in my classroom already. Anytime. Thanks for stopping by. If you need more help or if you need any more suggestions, I'll be happy to sit with you during our next PLC and go over some possible strategies. Thanks. I really appreciate that.